All right. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Diane. Shall I get things started?
Diane's muted.
I'm not. Go ahead, David. You're on.
Okay, great. Hello, everyone. It's great to have you all here joining us for the second evening of the American Wine Society 53rd Annual Conference. Even though we're doing this digitally, it's great to see so many of you out there healthy, happy, and enjoying some wine with us tonight. So as we get on with introducing our speaker this evening, you know, they say that a picture is worth 1,000 words. And I wanted to share this picture with you. And this is a picture of our speaker, Mark Davidson, from the conference last year. And we have actually used this photo for great affect when recruiting session presenters. We send all prospective session presenters this photograph, and we say, in order to have the privilege of presenting at an AWS conference, you must exhibit the enthusiasm and the joie de vivre of at least one Mark Davidson. And some people offer to bring Mark II. I don't think anybody could handle a Mark squared, however, but that's Mark. And if any of you are fans of his and saw him at the last conference, I unfortunately missed that session, you could say hello and let him know. But a little bit more about Mark. Mark, and we know what we're in for today. Anyone who saw the lineup of wines that he suggested us to get and have those wines with you, you know that he is really swinging for the bleachers with this tasting. When you just see the brands and the various styles of Shiraz that he's going to share, which is really an exploration of what some of the fine minds in the fine wine industry are coaxing from Shiraz Syrah. So Mark was born in London, and if legend is to believe, his family voluntarily relocated to Sydney. Mark has over 35 years experience in the hotel, restaurant, hospitality, and wine business. 15 of those, he was a sommelier. In 2001, he was named Sommelier of the Year at the Vancouver Wine Festival. And he also is a past recipient of the Spirited Industry Professional Award. And he served for a time as department head and instructor with the International Sommelier Guild. He is also an active judge at national and international wine competitions. He is in the process of writing the Wines of Australia book for Classic Wine Library. But Mark comes to us today as the current head of the education department for Wine Australia in North America. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome, although we can't hear you, we know that you are applauding in your homes. Please welcome someone who I hope is going to be a longtime friend of the American Wine Society, Mr. Mark Davidson. Mark.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dave, for that lovely introduction. And you made me nervous when you said you were showing a photo. Not that I have incriminating photos lying out there, but hey, you never know, right? I'm happy that it was about enthusiasm and you're using that as a benchmark. I'm very pleased with that. I'm going to, as I share the screen, I just want to, it was so cool to see how many people from all across the country are participating in this. I see 225 participants, but I know there are multiples in each of these sign-ins. So that is impressive and makes me feel pretty good. That's good, awesome stuff. So I'm going to share this screen a little bit here, but just a quick point. I had not been to the American Wine Society before, and I think rather naively or perhaps even stupidly thought it's about a society that gets together and drinks American wine. Maybe I'm just not that bright. So when I got invited to come and present, I was happy and looked at the lineup and thought, oh, this should be cool. And I was overwhelmed at the quality of questions that people asked and the enthusiasm, the level of knowledge. And so in terms of being a long-term friend, you've got me, because I think it's an awesome society and really engaging and really cool. So today what we're going to talk about is, and a slightly, I don't know if incendiary is the word, but a sort of inflammatory comment about no such thing as Australian Shiraz. It's like, what's this idiot talking about? Well, I'm going to address that because I think what we need to do is to understand regional expressions in Shiraz. And that's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to have a look at it. I gave you a list of wines, understanding that access to wines in the United States is regional and problematic sometimes. And so I tried to give you 3 different styles groups. That way, hopefully you were able to access them. It'll be difficult to address specific wines, but stylistically, I think we'll get somewhere. I'm going to explain Australian Wine Discover, which is our free education website, which I encourage people to have a look at. I'll look at that in a moment. We're going to talk about the history of Shiraz in Australia, the factors that affect the style and quality of Shiraz. And to the best of my ability, we're going to have a look at the characteristics and typical sort of regional expressions. Quick look at the education site, just because I want you to jot this down. All of the slides that I'm using today are pulled from that, organized in the way I want them. But the reality is, if you go to www.australianwinediscover.com, you have access to all this amazing wealth of information, modules, programs that are all downloadable. They're free, they're downloadable, they're editable. So if there are some educator types or just study type individuals in the group, go have a look. You have to sign in to get in there initially, but once you're in there, it's free program materials and resources. It's really worth a look. So australianwinediscover.com, go look at it. It's free. Okay, so what's wrong with this slide? Look at that. I'll tell you what's wrong with this slide. There's only one of those things we say. That's only one of those things that's part of the general wine vernacular, and that's Australian Shiraz. And that's a problem. American Cabernet, we don't say that. You guys are Americans and you love America and you love Cabernet from America. You don't say that though. You go to a place. Generally it's California. Mostly you'll go straight to Napa and say, I love Napa Cab. You don't say, oh, give me some more French Pinot. You talk Burgundy, or you talk, Pinot from specific places. So I think the reason that I put that up there is to make us understand that I think it's an expression that we have to stop saying. I've had people in the trade say to me, oh, I love Australia. The wine's great. It's such a great region. Australia's a country. It's not a region. But when it's pitched, and I think this is actually our industry's fault, because we've pitched this style of Shiraz and we've talked Australian Shiraz for a long time, or Australian wine for a long time, instead of the specific regional expression. So that's what we're going to try and uncover today and sort of get out of the vernacular. So we're not going to talk about Australian Shiraz. We're going to talk about regional expressions. So a little look today at some of the elements that make up Australia, just to sort of set the stage for when we get into specific Shiraz regions. Australia has 65 GIs or geographic indications. So that's like our appellation system, if you like, or AVAs. It's not strict and tied as to what you can and can't plan and can and can't do the way the French system or the Italian system is, but they are legal boundaries that explain that explain what's going on within the regions. But I just want to set a bit of a stage, because I think the narrative around Australia is sometimes skewed. So this map I love, because I think it shows you the scale of Australia. So when I hear commentary about, hey, what was the vintage in 2015 like in Australia? It's like, I don't know. What was the weather in Europe like? Or what was the weather in the United States like? So it's a big country with incredible diversity. So if you're talking about Margaret River, for example, you're basically sitting in Morocco. And if you're talking Hunter Valley, you're, east of Romania. So there's a large geographic spread. That being said, that there are elements that sort of, fit where it kind of pushes people into a specific, or pushes wineries into a specific southern section there. But here's the other part of it. And I think along with the narrative that I believe is somewhat challenging about Australia is that because sometimes the lead-in discussion about Australia is about all these big brands, and people have heard of Yellowtail and they've heard of these other big brands. And the reality is those brands are successful, but we don't have that discussion talking about the big co-ops in Italy or the big co-ops in France. We talk about the fine wines, and we don't lead off a discussion of California with Beringer White Zinfandel. Not there's anything wrong with Beringer White Zinfandel, but the point is that narrative, should start at the top and work down. And here's another really interesting piece of the puzzle. while those big brands make Australia seem like we're a massive wine producing country, if you were to add up the vineyard acreage, we're at about 135,000 hectares of vineyard under, or land under vine in Australia. That's equivalent to just a little bit less than Bordeaux and Burgundy combined. I'm not suggesting that's insignificant, because it's a significant amount, but it's two regions in France as opposed to, you know, the rest of what's going on in other parts of Europe. So we're not that big, and lost in the shuffle of big brand and global success with big brands from Australia is 2,700 small to medium-sized producers that are producing wonderfully expressive regional wines, and that's kind of where we're going to get at with the whole Shiraz discussion. So, no question, this, you know, Shiraz is our calling card. It's a really important variety in Australia. It's a quarter of total production. I think stats change obviously from year to year, but of that 135,000 hectares under vine, about 44,000 hectares is Shiraz. It's grown it's made at 4 out of every five wineries. It's pretty much grown in every single region. So when you look at that, you look at the cross-sectional regions from east to west and north to south, all of which have different soils, different exposures, different climates. How can there be such a thing as an Australian Shiraz? It's not. It doesn't exist. Probably don't need to explain the Shiraz-Syrah thing. We seem to have adopted the word Shiraz, and it's become very much an Australian thing. But the difference between the two varieties, they're the same. They're exactly the same variety. They express themselves differently. There is a little bit of a movement in parts of Australia to label wines Syrah, is as a sort of a nod to the fact that that it's a style that possibly moves away from the anticipated richer, full-bodied, more ripe style. I'm in two minds about that usage, but by and large, most of the bottled Shiraz wines made from Shiraz in Australia are labeled Shiraz, not Syrah. Everyone understand the accent? Too bad if you don't, because we don't have a translator. A little bit of history here of Shiraz. It arrived with the very first cuttings. It probably even arrived with the first fleet in the late 1700s. But the real serious push for expansion and planting of varieties started a little bit later as the colonies started to expand. And that was first in the 1820s, then the 1830s. It starts being brought in, and starting, you know, as the colonies expand, wine growing along with other mixed agriculture started to happen, and Shiraz just happened to be one of those varieties that expanded with the others. And it was, when you look at the way the vines were collected to bring into Australia in the early days, the reality is that there wasn't a lot of like, oh gosh, let's bring this is going to do well in Australia. Nobody really knew what was going to do well. It was a shotgun approach. All sorts of different varieties were brought in, and boom, let's plant them, see what does well. And clearly Shiraz is in the ground from some of those early plantings still today, because it did well, as is Grenache and a few other varieties. Then as the colonies start expanding from the 1840s to the 1890s, they start producing really good quality wines. And there was a little bit of a fortified wine push, which we'll talk about in a moment, but there are some vineyard plantings right now, because there's no phylloxera, and because these grapevines came into Australia pre-phylloxera. We have the largest collection of old vine, ungrafted pre-phylloxera vines anywhere on the planet. We've got vineyards that date back to the 1840s in Barossa, 1860s, and many other places. So it's kind of cool. It's a nice little element that people don't possibly understand when you start to sort of uncover in Australia. It's like, wow, actually some of the oldest vines, ungrafted vines, exist in Australia due to lack of phylloxera and due to this timing. So if this presentation can be made available to you guys, and I'll certainly send it back to your people in the office there, and you can access this. But all sorts of different plantings that can continue to expand as the colonies expand. And then by the early 1900s and then into the 1950s, Shiraz really becomes the most popular variety and starts to form the backbone of a lot of the major dry red wines as tastes change from fortifieds in the sort of, you know, early few decades of the 1900s. From the 50s onwards, taste started to change, and people were drinking more dry wine, and Shiraz formed the backbone of a lot of the wines. So it's a very important variety for us. Through the 80s, people started to get really, you know, into Australian wine in general, and Shiraz was really popular. Then there was, you know, not to pick on Robert Parker, he was true to his taste. He liked big concentrated wines. Some importers started supplying him with some boutique Australia, expensive boutique Australia wines, which were almost a bit caricature-like, but as compared to what, you know, the real examples of those wines from the regions were. They were over-extracted, super oaky, very high octane, high alcohol wines, which, you know, I think the world has a, you know, there's a place in the world for those sorts of wines, but it doesn't really tell the full picture. People drank those wines for a while. 10 years later, they're bored with them, saying that, you know, they're too big, they're too concentrated, they're not going to age, which, you know, they never really were going to. That led to you know, 5-6 years into this century, people got bored and they got a bit tired of Shiraz. And, you know, with all due respect, I'm starting to see a bit of a similar thing happening with Malbec from Argentina. I love it, but, you know, people are just, you know, people get, you know, they cotton onto something, they get excited about it. So I feel like Shiraz from Australia started to suffer. And in my role with Wine Australia and the work I've been doing with the trade, I've been doing it for almost 10 years. At the beginning, it was like people saying, oh, you know, Shiraz is our hallmark variety. We need to show that to the trade. And I was really adamant and said, nah, not going to do this. They're bored with this. They need to see that there's other things being produced in Australia. We can come back and revisit Shiraz. And now's the time where people are very interested in looking at it again. And I think it's fun to sort of see how it's evolved as a variety and to be reminded how bloody good it is to be right from the start. I'm going to get into some sort of technical stuff, but I'm not going super deep on this. Certainly happy for those geeky members of the society, I'm happy to answer questions afterwards. I've got my email at the end of the presentation. But just talking a bit about, you know, Shiraz in the vineyard, Shiraz in the winery, and how these elements shape the character and style of the wines. Clones of vine age, the work, it's funny, when you talk Pinot Noir anywhere on the planet, people immediately start talking clones and various things. The Shiraz clones we've got in Australia, they've been there for such a long time. There's a bit of work now happening with it, but it's been there for such a long time. I don't think people really understood what the clones were. They were just what we would consider, we don't use this term, but sort of almost like heritage clones, if you like. That's an important piece of the puzzle. Vine age is very, very important. We've got an old vine charter. Some of the things that you do in the vineyard and those viticultural hazards, let's sort of address them. The vine itself is actually quite adaptable. And that's why the selection of wines I've asked you to get covers, I mean, it's not a cool climate variety by any stretch, but moderate through to warm climate, you can produce very interesting styles of wine. But it is a vigorous variety that can yield quite heartily if you're not careful. Even on relatively low fertile soils. You've got to be careful with water management. You've got to be careful with the vine vigor. It is a vigorous variety. The old vine discussion. I think it's a funny, as much as I think it's a really cool thing to be able to look at this and go, wow, some of the largest collection of old vine Shiraz exists in Australia, especially in Barossa, but it's also in various other parts of the country. Hunter Valley, Victoria, parts of McLaren Vale. The debate, I think, is that, you know, there's no question old vines make better wines, but at what point is that, you know, sort of a point of diminishing returns? What I think is cool, though, all things considered, but when you can sit and you try, I don't know, the Langmuir Freedom Shiraz that was planted in 1843 and it's still producing today, you can't tell me there isn't something kind of cool about going, wow, this is the oldest Shiraz vineyard on the planet, and that has something to do. But it's something that I think is an emotional sort of, you know, fun sort of connection when you're drinking wine. But the reality is, though, old vines do better. There are some physiological and actual tasting wise, there's some really cool things about old vines. In Australia, the vagaries of challenging climate, whether it be drought or heat stress in some of those warmer vintages, old vines do better. They're more consistent year in, year out. Their root systems are deeper. They're accessing more micronutrients. And frankly, there's water down there that they're accessing. So many of the old vines right now in Australia, old Shiraz vines, they're not irrigated. They're dry farmed. They've switched away from that, and they're doing all sorts of practices in dry farming them. Whereas a young vine will struggle in those warmer, drought-stricken years and challenging vintages. The producers too, and I mean, I feel like by association you get this, and power of suggestion possibly, but there is a quality of tannin. There's concentration of fruit for sure. There's a quality of tannin, I think, that exists in old vines that people talk about. It's a supple, concentrated tannin, but they're not harsh. They're really soft and supple sort of tannins, and that's a quality that a lot of the growers and a lot of the makers say. I'm just going to have a quick look because people are asking questions through the Q&A. The question was, How did Syrah, the name Shiraz become mostly used in Australia and versus Syrah? Well, there's two things about Syrah, and a lot of this has been proved to be incorrect, but people reckon that the use of the word Shiraz came from this idea that around the town of Shiraz in what was then Persia, now Iran, that's where the origins of Shiraz are. They've proven that to be wrong. That's where the name came from. And then there was one side of the equation that said, no, it originated near Syracuse in Sicily, therefore Syrah. That's sort of been proven to be wrong. I almost think Shiraz probably came about because Australians are notorious at mispronouncing things, but we'll leave it at that. Original question from Lisa Jones. Hi, Mark. Were the vines initially brought in from where? Good question. Mostly Europe. There were no native vines in Australia. They were brought in from Europe. A lot of the collections came from parts of the Rhone. They were also on their way through from Busby when he was coming through and going around the Cape in South Africa. He picked up some vines in South Africa too, mostly Europe though. And at the time when Busby was going back to collect the vines, he collected the vines from the country that was the most famous, and that was France at the time. How has fires affected the wine areas? Chris, I'm going to answer that one later, if you don't mind. Remind me if I don't. So old vines, I think that's a cool discussion, and it's a really important piece of the puzzle in Australia for Shiraz specifically. All right. The Barossa, this is cool. I reckon this is really cool, and I wish the world would adopt this, never mind the rest of Australia, but the Barossa has done this. They've actually quantified what it means to use the term old vine, and they've set up what's called the Old Vine Charter. So in Barossa, the use of the word old vine, you can't just use it. And my specialty before I became back involved with Australia was actually French wine. I spent a lot of time doing my studies and was in France. And I always love it because in France, it's like, oh, they're vieilles vignes. And you say, okay, well, how old are they? And, oh, yeah, 25 years or so. I don't know. But here, you can't just use that term. And I love this. I think it's really cool. Old vine has to be 35 years plus. Survivor vine, 70 years plus. Centenarian, over 100. And then we've added this additional thing of ancestor vines, 125 years plus. So that's a moving target as vines get a bit older. And I love that. So you can't use those terms. It is, there is a certain, like it's you have to prove that these vines are old, and there's vineyard records and also DNA testing. So I love that. I wish the rest of Australia would do it. Irrigation. Now, Australia is a country where irrigation is permitted. As you probably know from some of your studies in many parts of Europe, irrigation is only allowed for the establishment of vineyards and for extenuating circumstances like drought. That's changing slowly but surely. In general, the shallow soils and young vines tend to need irrigation, but as I mentioned before, a lot of those old vines, and Shiraz itself is quite adaptable, old vines tend to not need it, and there's a lot more of a push towards, number one, irrigation is great, it's fine, but you know what, it requires water, and water is a very precious resource in Australia, so the less we have to use, the better. But Shiraz itself can cope with some fairly adverse conditions. You do have to be careful in some areas, and we're talking about mostly the comment about generous irrigation is more about that sort of more commodity style of Shiraz and that sort of more mass market wine, where if you do irrigate it too much, they just sort of blow up and you get dilute flavors. But that's not a comment about Shiraz. It's a comment about wine in general. So that lacks flavor and concentration certainly exists with Shiraz. Pruning, that's, I think the shape and texture and the feel and taste of wines in general from Australia, but Shiraz specifically, has really been affected over the last 10 to 15 years by a bunch of things that are going on in the vineyard and a bunch of things that are happening in the winery. And that's what I'm hoping to address with some of this stuff here, is that if you can control excessive growth and work with canopy management techniques with Shiraz, you can do shading, you can do more fruit exposure, you can protect from sunburn. There's a whole bunch of really cool things that are sort of micromanaging the quality of the fruit. And I think that's why we're getting more freshness, and I'm hoping that shows in the wines today. Keeping an eye on. Question from Rosemary, good question. How do they go about verifying vine age? DNA testing is done, but there's also vineyard records. You have to remember, certainly in Barossa specifically, which is where the only place right now where that's actually being done, was settled by Germans. Now, I can make fun of Germans because I'm half German. My mum's German. But if you know anything about German culture, they're very detail-oriented, so they kept really good records. careful what I say here. But the reality is that those records were kept, and so people can go back and look and see it. And then there's ways of DNA testing. It's not all 100% accurate, but you can get within, you can get to pretty close to understanding what category they would fit into. Okay, on to yield. We've talked a bit about this. Depends on factors. Yield can, but whilst the yield can be a bit aggressive if you're not careful with Shiraz, age of the vine has something to do with it. As vines get older, they naturally produce less. It's not that dramatic in Australia with older vines because they're ungrafted. So the flow of nutrients from ungrafted vines as opposed to grafted vines, because around the graft there tends to be a bit of a slight choking as the vine gets a bit older. Age of vine has something to do with the dropping of the yield. Depends on the vine vigor, which is about that site characteristic. So it just depends. And frankly, for the fun, cheap and cheerful supermarket Shiraz that's grown in the Riverland, they get the yields up a little bit, but high quality yields for the best quality wines, best regional expressions, they're not high. Clones, as we talked about, there's not a lot. It's a small gene pool. But for the geeks in the factor here, there's a couple of clones that people are using and are curious about. So those they're listed and you can do your experimentation. But more work is being done more recently with Shiraz clones to try and understand those heritage clones and the vineyard sites where it's just been almost a bit taken for granted. It's like, oh, we've got this lovely Shiraz here. It's like, what is it? Where's it from? It's like, well, nobody knows. It's been here for 100 years, but actually sort of propagating that. And the vineyards, the owners of Henschke Winery doing a lot of really good work with old vine propagation and clone identification, if you like. Okay, so carrying on here. In the winery, I think some of the stuff that's really shaped the more modern look of Shiraz, and as I said, I'm hoping this is reflected in the glasses that, of the various wines that you've managed to collect tonight based on my recommendations. I think there's a few things where things have changed a little bit. Whole cluster use. So I think there was a bit of, I don't want to say formulaic, but I think it's probably true. There was a bit of a recipe for making Shiraz, especially say from Barossa or some of the more classic regions that have been around for a while. And I'm not sure that was so different in wine production throughout the 70s and 80s in parts of California. There's a lot of recipes going on. We're making wines by the numbers. And I think there was a way you made things. You used, you destemmed and you used header boards and you did, there was these techniques. Whereas now people are challenging that a little bit to try and get additional complexity. Fermentation vessels and also fermentation temperatures, the type of oak being used and the aging, all really part of this sort of evolution of what has been around for a long time in Australia, but this evolution has a major dramatic effect on, I think, the look, shape and feel of modern Shiraz in Australia. So let's maybe kind of look at some of those. Whole bunch fermentation, not something that was traditionally done with Shiraz, but now is definitely part of the equation. Either that or adding some stems afterwards, de-stemming and then adding the stems after. So what is that all about? Just to sort of, it's a technique that's very much used for Pinot Noir production. I'm sure some of you are aware of it. It's a characteristic, I think, when you leave the whole stems, you get a different, when you add stems back in, you get a different character. When you do whole bunch fermentation with the stems in there, you get a different type of fermentation starting out, but the stem inclusion tends to just bring a different structure, sometimes a slightly more herbaceous character, but there's also tannins in those stems and it gives the wine sometimes a bit of structure and an aromatic profile. People like it, people don't like it. I like it. If it's over the top, I don't. One thing for sure, whole bunch and stem inclusion Shiraz, it needs time. It needs a bit of time to age and for those characteristics to integrate. If we think about one of the most, it's not a Shiraz producing winery, we think about one of the most famous producers in Burgundy is 100% whole bunch and stem, like using stems, and that's Domaine de la Romanée-Conti. Those wines are not for immediate drinking. They're about down the road. And that's, I think, is a good way to look at stem inclusion. Malolactic fermentation, that slides in there just to show a process. Most reds go through ML. I think a cool evolution is moving away from commercial strains of yeast and just letting the yeast fermentation start with a native or what we call native or wild yeast fermentations. There's a little debate about, cultured yeast being in and around the winery environment. But the reality is that when you use native yeast, in real simple terms, you get a different sort of fermentation, generally a little bit slower, but also the super aggressive strains of commercial yeast tend to ferment faster, but you get just different flavors and different textures. So that adds complexity as well. The co-fermentation Shiraz Viognier thing, we'll talk about that in a moment. That's been a development that kind of peaked a little bit in probably the early 2000s, and everyone was sort of having an attempt at it based on a couple of successful wines that were made from Shiraz Viognier. It is a co-ferment. We'll talk about that in a moment, but the reality is that that's dropped off a little bit now. The people that have always done it really well are sticking to it. Things like Bordeaux techniques, like délestage, like rack and return, where you drain the tank, leave the cap in there, and then pour the wine back on top of it. Maybe, you know, these next couple of things here are real elements that I think have changed the texture and flavors of Shiraz. More extended maceration times. We never had to worry about extraction of tannins and flavor. We always had that in Shiraz. But what we're finding is that when you have extended macerations for like 20, 30, 40, 50 days, maybe even, you know, up to 60 days, what you're getting is a different quality of tannins. You're not extracting more tannins, you're getting a more polymerized tannin. And by that, what you end up getting is, I think you get a more savory quality. So that's changed a little bit. So has oak use. Oak use used to always know, and, you know, some of those wines still exist. You could, you know, lots of American oak. Just remember, you know, Shiraz absorbs all this American oak. And that attitude has changed dramatically. American oak is still used. It's used a lot less, sometimes in combination with French, but a lot more French oak is being used, if not exclusively. Another important piece of that puzzle is that a lot less new oak, percentage-wise, is being used. There were quite a lot of wines that were just 100% new oak every year, or like high proportions of new oak. People are backing that off and using larger format, older oak, so that now, as it should be in all great wines, oak needs to be background noise. It's not about upfront. The other piece of the puzzle is I think in general, we are an impatient bunch. We don't age. And the beautiful thing about Aussie Shiraz is that it is so lip-smackingly delicious from various regions, certainly the warmer regions. When it's young, you gargle it down and you don't end up appreciating the complexity that exists, and we're not aging them. And, you know, in general, a lot of people aren't aging wine as much, and I always make a joke because I think if you drink your wines, they don't age. I don't know if you've noticed that. And there's deliciousness factor of you know, top quality Barossa or McLaren Vale Shiraz is there. So you drink it, but you sometimes miss out. You need to sell these wines sometimes for 10 or 15 years, and they can really repay that patience if you have it. These are the major Shiraz regions around the world, and around Australia rather. And I mean, a lot of our education information and this list of the major regions here, it's grown everywhere, but these are the regions that you're going to access around the world, specifically in the US to a greater or lesser degree. There are some here that are probably a bit harder to find, and I've sort of eliminated those regions, but it's grown in a lot of areas. And so it's good to see, it's really important to see that, you know, what you're seeing here is what we're going to really focus on. And now I tried to do that with your list. Let me have a quick answer of these questions. Does Australia have its own oak? No, it does not. It has hardwoods, but it's not used. Now we import the wood. We've tried some elements of doing some seasoning of the wood in Australia, but the environment's a bit too dry. Minimal cap management pushed down with extended maceration. Carrie, I'm going to answer that later because that's pretty detailed, and I'll get back to that one. All right, we are going to do a little traverse around the different styles of Shiraz. Before we go there, we're going to answer sparkling red. I don't know if anyone's ever had a sparkling Shiraz. I love the stuff, but I didn't always love the stuff. I thought it was kind of a bit of a freak show in the beginning. Didn't really like it until I was doing when I was living in Vancouver, I was doing a wine dinner for the Australian Wine Society, and they wanted to use sparkling Shiraz as one of the first course wines. And I was like, oh, gee, what am I going to do with this? And then I started to appreciate the genuine, really cool abilities of the food friendliness of this. It goes back decades for us. We've been making this stuff since 1800s, late 1800s. We used to call it sparkling Burgundy. Produced with Shiraz, don't ask. That was just back in the good old days when you could label it what you want. Best example are actually traditional method. ridiculously food friendly, and they tend to see a bit of oak maturation. So kind of interesting. Do it. Actually, if you've got access to sparkling Shiraz, get a bottle for Thanksgiving. I love America. I lived in Canada for years, and Canadian Thanksgiving is cool. Americans, man, you do Thanksgiving right. I love Thanksgiving here in the US, but man, is that a busy meal with sweet and savory and tart and sour and every single flavor combination you can imagine. Give this a try. Sparkling Shiraz is the deal. Works really well with. I try to do that every Thanksgiving. Everyone thinks I'm weird, but you know, I'm comfortable with that. Before we get into this, I'm going to make sure I'm answering these. Zeta cells, I think the research on extended maceration is much more definitive for cold soaking pre-fermentation as opposed to post-fermentation maceration. Too many variables to control. Well, unfortunately, that's just not the case. The Zeta cells, I appreciate your commentary here, but I can list off 100 wineries now that are doing 40, up to 40 and 50 days, and there's a couple that are playing around. Yes, you can run into some problems, but anyway, we'll leave that for another discussion. Into New South Wales and Australian Capital Territory. That's two major regions in the state of New South Wales for to have a look at. Hunter Valley, and we'll look at Canberra District. There's a couple of beautiful wines that come out of there that we do see in the market. Hopefully you had access to them. I'm not sure if you would have. Hunter's the actual birthplace of the Australian wine industry, sort of. I mean, it started around Sydney, but Sydney was sort of too warm. They moved up to the Hunter Valley. Also warm, borderline tropical, subtropical climate there, so slightly challenging. However, the way they've managed to deal with this otherwise too warm a climate is it's a fairly short sort of growing season. So whilst the, I think whilst the style, when you look at Hunter as a warm climate region, the wines don't present themselves that way. They actually come across as more medium-bodied, savory, and red-fruited, which is kind of interesting. So Hunter Shiraz, definitely, it's richly flavored and earthy tones, but there's a sort of medium-bodied savoriness to them that I think it belies the fact that it's actually a warm climate. It doesn't have the heat spikes that places like Barossa and McLaren Vale do. And so you've got this short condensed season with rain pushing in at the end of the harvest. So people often get the grapes in a bit earlier, but they have enough ripeness that you know, don't have big diurnal differences there. So they get the ripeness they need in a shorter period of time. Oh man, Canberra District is magic. We don't see enough of the wines, unfortunately. There's a famous wine called Clonakilla. If you've ever had the pleasure of drinking this, I think it's one of the great expressions of Shiraz and Shiraz Viognier on the planet. Never mind that, as much as I love Côte Rôtie, and I think it sits right up there on the same table with those. Borderline, it's not really cool climate there. It's a moderate climate, but there's a beautiful floral expression out of the Shirazes that have come out of the Canberra District. That is actually from Clonakilla, and it is about co-fermentation. There's no question. There's a bunch of chemical reactions that happen. I'm not qualified to explain the catechins and all the things that people talk about. The ultimate reason for doing the co-ferment, it's a nod, a tip of the hat to what goes on at Côte Rôtie, but the reality is that this co-fermentation, it could be any white variety to be honest, but the reality with co-fermentation is that there's this weird sort of setting of the color, and there's this textural thing that changes, and it's an aromatic lift. And it's not just about the Viognier aromatics that come out, it brings out the aromatics in Syrah and Shiraz, and there's a textural thing, and often the winemakers in Australia talk about this slippery texture that it adds to the final wine. So it's a textural thing on top of everything else. I love that photo though. And as you can see, when people say, oh, we used 2% Viognier, it's like, well, they're getting a bucket and chucking it in there. It's not quite as accurate as you would imagine. A lot of questions coming in. Where is the Yarra Valley in Victoria? I'll get there, I promise you. We're enjoying the last of the 1998s. What vintages are drinking best right now? 98's awesome. I actually think right now there's a lot of 2006 was a cooler vintage, and I think some of those wines are showing beautifully, especially from Barossa. Do you serve sparkling Shiraz with a chill? Yes, indeed. Chill it a lot. What's the next region to watch for? And global warming impact. Let me get back to that. Why is Molly Duca so good? I think Molly Duca is so good because they pick quite often quite a bit later than other people in McLaren Vale. So you get a lot of concentration and big fruit, and people like that. Which wines in your list are from where? I'm confused. I won't be able to answer that right now. Hopefully we'll get to that at the end. Okay, South Australia. These are the major regions in South Australia. I'm going to quickly go through these, spend a lot more time on Barossa because the access to some of these other wines is difficult. Let's have a look at Barossa. One of the oldest, sort of best known Shiraz regions. I don't like saying Barossa's like our Napa, but I mean, there are parallels in the sense that it's the most well known. When you look around the place, when you look around retail and restaurants, there's a lot of Barossa wines on the shelves, and Shiraz usually forms most of them. 66% of what's planted in Barossa is Shiraz. An important component in classic Shiraz Cab blends, and it's also the style, I think, is evolving. I think there is modern Barossa. Without a doubt, Barossa is a warm climate region, so the wines are full-bodied, richly textured with that sort of black fruit and pepper character. There is an element of change going on, and you can apply this to Shiraz from everywhere in these warmer regions. There's a freshness element, and I love what's happening with it. And that's not a term I think I would ever thought I'd be using 10, 15 years ago about Barossa Shiraz, but picking times are being earlier, good canopy management's happening, addition of stem inclusion, less new oak. What you're getting is this more vibrant, pure fruit quality as opposed to the old school sort of, what's the word? Yeah, sometimes you used to get a bit more sort of porty, concentrated, overripe styles. And I think that's changed, picking at the right time rather than when it's overripe. I used to watch this I love Zinfandel from California, especially Dry Creek area. But in the early days, 80s and 90s, there was a lot of that raisinated fruit quality in those early Zins from California. We all loved them in the day, but it tends to make the wines a bit porty and not as fresh. And I think we're seeing some more freshness coming out of Shiraz from Barossa. Eden Valley, higher elevated area. The Shiraz being grown up there is different. Still's got concentration and power, but it's cooler up there, and you're getting a bit more sort of, there's a herbal element, but not green herb. I love Stephen Hedgeke's comment about bay leaf and sage and pepper, and I think that's a brilliant example. One of the most expensive wines produced in Australia, obviously, is Grange, which is not from here, but the best, I think, one of the best expressions of Shiraz and one of the most unique and amazing single vineyard wines on the planet, period, no matter where they're made from, no matter what it's made from or where it is. Hill of Grace is one of those wines. It is a really, really special, really magic wine. Okay, Q&A, what can I do? I called a Lambrusco a sparkling Shiraz on my WSET diploma, though. Could have sworn I was picking up some mint and eucalyptus notes. More concentration, sweeter fruit in a sparkling Shiraz than you would get in Lambrusco. Lambrusco would probably come across as dry, even though the sparkling Shiraz is dry. The fruit's riper. Are they growing Shiraz in Tasmania? Yeah, there are a few little spots that have actually growing Shiraz, these little warm pockets. That's definitely happening in Tasmania. Not much, small production, but it exists. This is Mount Edelstone Vineyard in Eden Valley. That is the little sister to Hill of Grace. I put this in there because that straw that Prue Henschke's putting under the vines here is about, they don't even use those irrigation things. I took that photo in the early 2000s. They've pulled those out. So this is them dry farming now, and they put straw down once every 2 years. That retains moisture and also keeps weeds under control, which is kind of cool. But that was planted in 1911. So that's not super old, but think about it, it's over 100 years. McLaren Vale, one of those great regions in South Australia also, which is sort of, has some similarities to Barossa, but this is on the ocean. But it's Mediterranean sort of feel there. It's not like cold ocean. It's more Mediterranean. Super diverse geologically speaking. All sorts of great red wines being produced there. Shiraz being the calling card, even though they're playing around with all sorts of Mediterranean varieties. Again, full-bodied style of Shiraz, but with a real pure blue fruit kind of quality, and possibly a slightly different caliber of tannin, a little more chalky, sort of almost cocoa powder-like tannins. And yeah, McLaren Vale's lovely. It is literally, I was with Madeline Triffon, who's a master sommelier, who's American master sommelier, but she's has Greek background, and she was just with me on a trip there about a year ago. And as we're driving in, she said, "Oh my gosh, I feel like I'm driving into Greece or somewhere in southern Italy." And that's the feel you get when you get to McLaren Vale. Very much a Mediterranean sort of feel to it. Keeping on top of all your lovely questions here. Thank you for these. It's good stuff. I had a 2008 Grail of Lisa. I don't know where that is. 18% alcohol. I don't know what that is, John. You can add that. You can answer that question. Okay, McLaren Vale, carrying on here. Clare Valley. Don't see a lot of, the thing about Clare is that it's known for Riesling, and yet not quite side by side. There's Shiraz and Cabernet being grown, slightly different parts of the region. The big difference, the thing about it is here, really cool nights, and it's also about elevation as to where, and protection from cooling breezes or exposure to these cooling breezes as to whether Shiraz will do well or Riesling would do well. But the warm days help us to develop really nice flavors and richness and depth in the Shiraz. But these consistent cool nights that, well, I've got to go Celsius here, but it could be 35 degrees Celsius, so pushing 100 degrees, and drop to 6 Celsius. So that's like 40, 45. So it's a lot cooler. So those nights help retain acidity. So you get this richness, but this lovely sort of vibrant acid and pure fruit. Cool area to have a look at. This was Adelaide Hills is just outside of Adelaide, in the hills around Adelaide. Gee, I wonder where they came with the name of Adelaide Hills. It's a German settlement as well, in the same way that Barossa is, but it was mostly known, it was cool climate viticulture, so it didn't expand as quickly, and mostly known for bubble and sparkling wine production made from Pinot. And now table wines from Pinot and Chardonnay are really popular. Sauvignon Blanc's great up there. Little pockets of Adelaide Hills are brilliant for Shiraz, but it's at elevation, 400 to 500 meters above sea level. So the style is more medium to full bodied, and with this sort of fragrant, spicy, peppery, fine tannin style. Beautiful stuff. Quick look into Victoria, and we'll make our way around, and then I want to see if I can get some commentary about some of the wines. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. A couple of really classic areas. For the person asking about Yarra, this is Yarra right here, just outside of Melbourne. I don't know if you can see that to the right of Melbourne. I'm not sure if my cursor shows up on the screen like this. Mostly known for Pinot, Chardonnay, and bubble production. However, there are little pockets that are brilliant for Shiraz in Yarra Valley, and they're labeling it Syrah because it's a very restrained, cool climate style. Let's look at Heathcote, and we'll skip over Grampians, but really cool. I love the wines from Heathcote. They are big, they are full-bodied, and in terms of weight and intensity, very similar to Barossa, but I love having them side by side with people because the flavor profile is 100% different. So just that expression of Shiraz from Heathcote, grown on 450 million year old ironstone soils with a fair bit of iron oxide in the top soils. You're getting this real sort of minerally driven, sort of concentrated, rich, ripe fruit, but with it's a different flavor profile. It's really cool. Very, very different. That's actually Jasper Hills, George's paddock. That's a Shiraz vineyard. And that's the the Cambrian soils called, they call them greenstone. And the stones aren't green. I guess when you wet them, they're a bit green. But that's 450 million year old geology right there. Grampians, another really cool area. Some really good sparkling Shiraz from this area, but some very famous famous Shiraz coming out of this area. Used to be called Great Western. Now Great Western's a sub-region of that. Beechworth. Hard to see the wines here, but oh man, I love what's going on. That's real, genuine, cool climate right at the foothill of the Victorian Alps. You're getting that medium-bodied, savoury style. Quick look over into Western Australia. It's funny because there are some areas there. We'll focus on Margaret River, but Margaret River is really known for Cabernet, Chardonnay, and Sem Sauvignon Blanc blends. And when you talk to people, it's like, hey, I really like your Shiraz. Yeah, it's okay. But, we're all about Cabernet. There's this dual influence of the Indian Ocean and the Southern Ocean here that affect Margaret River, and that promotes a style that you can't call Margaret River cool climate, moderate climate for sure, mild maritime, but you get this sort of medium to full-bodied Shiraz that again is accented a little bit more towards that savory red fruit kind of quality, which I think is really, really appealing. That's Margaret River, Great Southern in this area here. I went there for the first time, and this is, Perth is a long way from anywhere. It's one of the most remote major cities on the planet. Then you drive 3 hours to Margaret River, another couple hours to Great Southern. You feel like you're in another world, and it is brilliant. I loved it. Can't wait to go back there. There are very few wines from Great Southern here in the US, but the style of Shiraz that is grown usually in this middle section around Mount Barker. There's a subsection here called Mount Barker. Again, medium-bodied, savory sort of style. And now I'm going to stop sharing and look at your lovely faces and answer a couple of questions that I didn't get to. So let me get back to that. Fires, how have they affected the wine areas? Only 1% of vineyard areas got affected, actually burnt and affected, but depending on where you were, smoke taint was a big issue in 2020, as is it's going to be in California and other areas. And so what we experienced a little bit is that smoke taint in the past, we never worried too much about it until post-Veraison. Now we're starting to understand that smoke hung in the Hunter Valley for 80 consecutive days. That was pre-Veraison, that was, you know, it was all, and we do realize that smoke it is affecting vines in a different way. So yeah, real tragic. I mean, those fires were tragic as they are in California, and lots of, not trying to sort of mitigate the losses people have had, but in terms of the overall vineyard area in Australia, only 1% was affected. More when you add the fact that certain wineries won't be making wine because of the smoke, but actual damage to the vineyards because of the fire, not so much. Hand-picked, good question. Shiraz is mechanically harvested many of the easier areas, but old vine Shiraz, you can't do anything but hand-pick it. Dean, that was a question. Can you post the email, his email again as well? I'll do that right at the end. I'll pull that up again. You suggested 3 types of Shiraz on the wines. Can you generalize each style? Absolutely, that's exactly what we're gonna get to now. John, so I don't know if anyone wants to jump in, but what I was trying to show to you with that selection of wines was just a cross-section of styles in 3 glasses, if you like, that showed that not all Shiraz taste the same. Now, from Australia tastes the same. So I sort of categorized warmer climate, moderate climate, cool climate. My guess is that it would have been a little bit hard for, it would have been a bit hard to find some of those cooler climate wines. I'm not really sure what people got. So here's my way of trying to categorize Shiraz styles. Let's take the commercial style of Shiraz that has led us to this Australian Shiraz moniker. That would be fun, affordable, Shiraz grown in Riverland or Riverina in broadacre farming with soft fruit, blackberry fruit, soft tannins, easy drinking, chug-a-lug. Great, no issue with that. It's the same as drinking, I don't know, California Appellation, really cheap and cheerful Cabernet. It's less about the varietal expression. It's more about simple, easy drinking red wine. Then I would try and sort of categorize them into 2 broad groups: cooler climate Shiraz, warmer climate Shiraz, stuff that kind of fits and sort of, you know, works along this sort of spectrum, if you like. So from cooler climate wines, I think the overall style tends to be more medium bodied, less alcohol, hovering in that sometimes 12.5, but usually 13 to 14% alcohol, but in that 13% range. More savory qualities. More cooler climate grown Shiraz tends to it tends to elevate that rotundone quality. Rotundone was the element isolated by the AWRI that gives you that pepper quality. So cooler climate Shiraz tend to be more peppery. And there's a different spice that comes into the warmer climate. More red fruit. Sometimes you're getting sort of raspberry or dark raspberry, and sometimes maybe cranberry in those cooler climate Shiraz. And without a doubt, a more savory quality. Moving as you work through, and there's, you know, it's a bit of a continuum, into warmer climate Shiraz, blackberry, blueberry, softer tannins, riper tannins, richer, higher alcohol, but, you know, usually managed well. And yeah, just that textural. I think there's this almost like, say Barossa, for example, I think there's almost this warm, earthy sort of a spice quality that exists. And I think that's the Barossaness coming through, because I see it in other varieties as well as Shiraz. But yeah, I think that's the way to answer the question there about how would I categorize them. That's the best I can sort of come up with. The Margaret River slide, we are drinking Lewin Margaret River, please. And what's the difference between 1, 2, and 3? Okay, I've tried to explain that. How is China impacting price and style? Let me pull up my shared screen again. We'll look at Margaret River, then I'll address the issues that are affecting us with China right now. Okay, so Margaret River for the people asking those questions. Right here, Margaret River. Oops, apologies. Right here. So yeah, you're affected on 3 sides by ocean. So wherever you look and feel and smell, you smell the ocean in Margaret River. Super cool place. It was isolated as being really similar to Bordeaux in a warm vintage, so Cabernet does well there. But I love standing on the coast here on Margaret River, looking westward, and you realize next stop is South Africa, and you could miss it. Just quietly circle the globe in the Southern Ocean. Lovely stuff. It's a really, really special place. In my role at Wine Australia, I'm not supposed to have favorite regions or favorite wines. If I were to have a favorite region, Margaret River might just be one of them. for those of you wanting that, I'll leave that up there again and let me continue answering some of these questions. I think I've got it there. I don't know. The China question. So China has been an amazing place for Australian wine over the last 10 years. It's just gone from strength to strength, and the average price paid for Australian wine in China has been brilliant. It's been an amazing source. It's our top export market. There are some interesting issues going on now. We still don't know what it means. There's some sort of trade stuff going on that may, in the near future, mean that we are going to be hit with some stiff tariffs. But honestly, I can't really expand on it because we don't know, because we can't even get information coming out of China on that. However, there's a bit of sort of argy-bargy going on with China right now. We're hopeful that they don't impact it. They don't sort of apply ridiculous tariffs, but it's looking like they're going to apply something. Other questions? I can't seem to see my questions right now. Nope, I think that might be it, actually. So, any other questions?
Hi, Mark, it's Diane. Actually, in the chat, people are starting to put a couple of things in there if you'd like to go over there.
Okay, I'll go into the chat then. Where is my chat? Oh, yeah, there's 90 questions in there. Okay, we have Hewitson, Ashbrook, and Davidson as well. All wonderful. Davidson, you have a Davidson Shiraz? That's interesting. Cool. If you got Hewitson, that's great because that's classic. That's classic Barossa. Oh man, I can't even keep up with these questions. Torbreck, Short Smith, and Tyrrells. Beautiful. Who's Ronald? That is a beautiful snapshot of what I was trying to show to you, because I think what you should be seeing is that lovely, rich ripeness of the Barossa wine being reflected in Torbreck, and that beautiful purity of fruit too. So while you're getting richness, you're getting that sort of pure fruit quality. Sean Smith would have been a nice transition into a slightly more medium to full-bodied style, and that pepper element showing through. And then Tyrrells, savory, sort of probably almost a bit leathery, and you're getting Torbreck's great plum and black pepper, some graphite underneath. Awesome, love it. Lewin is an oak bomb. Oh, that's a shame. I haven't had the 17 Lewin. I'm surprised about that. Maybe it just needs a bit of time. New messages. Expand on cap management, extended MAC. Look, I'm not a winemaker. I've certainly made wine. The cap management idea is about, they're just people are trying to play around with different techniques with cap management. The old standard in Australia would have been you used header boards, set it down, and away you go for a short maceration period of maybe 7 to 10 days. So people are just playing around with delistage or rack and return, and extended macerations. About most people are still just not doing that. They're just playing around with sort of 10 to 12 days of maceration. But these extended ones from 30 to 40 and sometimes even 60, I think 30 to 40 is about normal. Not normal, but that's what people are playing around with. What they're saying is, and again, you're getting a more polymerized sort of tannin that comes out. It's not about extracting more tannin. It's about that polymerization, and you're getting a more savory quality. So my experience with some of the better people playing around with that is that savory element, I think it comes across as an umami quality, which some of you are probably aware of, but that to me, and that's as far as I can go. I mean, certainly email me afterwards and I'll put you in contact with some of the winemakers, and they can give you maybe a bit more elevated answer to than that. But yeah, anyway. What else we got here? It's hard to keep track on this because there's 1,000 million questions in here. Am I missing anything here, Diane? Help.
Hi, Mark. No, I think that was the best. A lot of that is just a lot of praise. And I think
Oh, good.
ready to taste the wines in their glasses or talk a little more about them.
Yeah, so please, I mean, I'd love to, jump in and unmute yourselves. Can they do that, Diane, and jump in with commentary, or is it got to be on the chat?
No, if they'd like to put their name in the chat, I'd be happy to turn their speaker on.
I can get back into Q&A there in there too. People have the Ben Haynes, Yarra Valley. 2019 was a good vintage, actually. Not a big vintage. It was a small vintage and more of a compressed short vintage. So overall quality was quite good. I'm hoping I haven't had the 19 from Ben Haynes. So I'm hoping that that's showing that sort of savory, medium-bodied, red-fruited quality. And maybe, John, you can jump in and make a comment on that. Cap management, how bad has COVID hurt the wineries? Yeah, COVID, I would have to say overall has not been fun. Has anyone enjoyed it? So COVID
live
is not...
because you invited him to talk. So,
oh,
John,
good. Jump in.
John, you're on.
Oh,
Yes, we can hear you.
sorry, what was the question?
How's that wine showing? I'm curious to see how that Yarra, does that Yarra fit the profile I was talking about, that sort of more medium-bodied, more savory quality with a bit of pepper character?
I think that was someone else was having that. I'm not having that one.
Okay, who's got it? It's John someone. John Nays, N-A-S-E.
Oh.
Sorry, wrong
That's
John.
not me.
Sorry.
All right, John Nays. I just put you on, John Nays.
That's John Nace, not me, I guess.
Yep. Sorry, that's my dad.
I'll forgive you.
Hey, Dad.
John
can you hear
Nays,
me?
you're live.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm trying to catch up here.
So I just wanted to know if did the Yarra, Syrah, or Shiraz show itself the way I was trying to explain, that sort of more medium-bodied and more savory and red-fruited qualities? Did that show up?
Yeah. So there's some herbal qualities to that.
Stem inclusion, probably.
Yeah, it's definitely young. But it seems like it might have a little bit of aging quality to it.
Good.
It's very fruit forward with some herbal qualities to it. It's yeah, medium bodied. Yeah, so I'd say you're on track.
Awesome. Good. No, it's good. And it's sort of nice to, I like those sorts of wines to give people a different look at what Shiraz can show itself from those sort of cooler regions. And that to me is always the fun element, because I think we know that flavor profile of Barossa a bit more comfortable with it. So it's nice to see those cooler climate ones. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's definitely not like a huge wine, but it does have a little bit of finesse with it.
Awesome. And yeah, like you said, still young. And I find that herbal quality would have probably come from stem inclusion. I haven't looked up the stats on that wine, but I do know Ben Haynes, he's probably playing around with a bit of whole bunch. And I do find that in a young wine that sometimes sticks out at first, you get that whole bunchy kind of quality, but the reality is that will sort of integrate better and it'll become this sort of, it's a complexing thing. It's kind of fun.
Great. I've got a question from AW Doctor. AW Doctor, you are up. I don't know what your name is.
Hi everyone. This is Adrian. I'm with my husband Willie, and we were just wondering about the Shiraz from the southeastern region. We weren't able to find all of the ones that were listed for this evening, so we did pick up one from the southeastern region, and just was wondering if those were of less quality or what's the information on those?
Yeah, that's a awesome question. You see a lot of that. That's the more sort of commercial and sort of broad appellation, if you like. Southeast Australia encompasses everything in Australia except for the west coast, where we talked about Margaret River and that area. So technically anything from Victoria, South Australia, and New South Wales, any of those regions, the fruit can be sourced from there. Mostly you're getting it from places like Riverland, where that broadacre farming is. And it's not about lesser quality. It's just they're fun, more affordable wines. And you're going to get that more sort of soft, easy drinking expression of Shiraz, more accented on blackberry and yeah, maybe some blueberry flavors. So I'm guessing, what was the name of the wine?
So we have the blueberry effect, the butterfly effect. And so this is one that we picked up from it's from 2018, but it's pretty good.
Oh, good. Yeah. I don't know that specific wine, but Southeast Appellation, it would be like saying, I'm trying to think of a comparable one, because there isn't really anything in the US that's that large, but it'd be like just like a California appellation. Means it can come from anywhere in California. And mostly those wines that have that California appellation come from Lodi or somewhere in the Central Valley, generally.
Yeah,
Go on.
it was pretty good, but for this evening, I did prefer the Hunter Valley. I just wanted to let you know that, and that
Oh,
was
awesome.
really good. The Tyrrell's
got
wine was
Tyrrell's?
excellent.
Awesome. That's great. That's
Thank
one of the
you.
most historic places, historic wineries up in the Hunter. That's like 6 generations right now. They're awesome wines. And I do think that that style is a really lovely style of Shiraz. And again, not a big full-bodied version, but just it's got that richness and texture you want, but it's just a bit more Australian. So good. I'm glad you like that. And you can see the difference between that and the Southeast Australia one, can't you? There's just more concentration and more precision in that wine.
Excellent. Yes, we do. And thank you so much.
Good.
Thank you. Up next, I've got Jeff Stabens with a question for you, Mark.
Go ahead.
Jeff, I am setting you up right now. You should be good. Jeff Stabens.
Okay, hi. I was just going to make a comment on the third wine, which is the Haynes.
Good.
Yep. I get a ton of like sweet spice on the nose, and I'm wondering if that's like from the oak or is the grape itself giving that character?
Combination. I honestly, I haven't had Ben's 2019. Unfortunately, I don't have the tech sheet in front of me, so I would have a look at the oak. He's not a real heavy oak user. I mean, oak would have been a piece of the picture there. I'm guessing that sweet spice thing is that the nice thing about Shiraz, wherever it's grown, is you do get lovely fruit. You get that sort of elevated fruit quality. But I think the spice is inherent in the variety in this particular case. And I'm also thinking that there's a bit of stem inclusion. So there's a herbal element in there that sometimes comes across as spicy as well, depending on the palate, come across as spicy. So that's where I think it's coming from. I'd be more inherent from the grape rather than the oak in this particular case.
Yeah, the grape and the stems. That sounds like a great explanation of it. We have a winemaker in the Finger Lakes. We're from the Finger Lakes in upstate New York. And he does Pinot, and his big thing is stem inclusion.
That's a big Pinot discussion. It's always historically been about Pinot. It's just becoming a Shiraz discussion for us in Australia. And I like it. It's added complexity. It's different, different character and different flavors. And I like it.
I did too.
Gives the wine a bit of grip. And it's almost like, I love bitter things like Campari, and I love Amaros after dinner and stuff. And I think stem inclusion gives you a sort of an almost hint of Campari quality. So I kind of like it.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, up next, I've got David and Alicia. They just said they had a comment to say.
Good. Yeah.
There you go. David, you live?
Yeah, it was just a comment. We've been fortunate enough. Our friends that are on this call have shared some great grandfather that they acquired while down in Australia. Wow. So it's quite a treat. That grain is about as good as it gets.
You've got great grandfather port in front of you?
No, I don't have it.
Our friends in Louisville have it, and they've shared some of it with us. It's outstanding, as you know.
Oh, because I was about to drive over, because I tell you what, that's for another discussion. But the fortified wine history in Australia is a wonderful legacy, albeit a lot less production these days. But oh man, that you get an opportunity to try some fortifieds, and the great grandfather from Penfolds. That is like liquid gold, just slowly making its way down your throat. That's magnificent. So now you've made me want it. But anyway.
Yes, it is. And Grange and RWT isn't too bad either. So
yeah, I don't know. I like the sound of your cellar.
We got plenty of RWT downstairs. Yeah.
Nice.
So,
awesome stuff.
It's good stuff. Besides,
well, thanks for your
that's
comment.
Shiraz too. So anyway, good stuff.
All right. Up next, we have David Sass with a question. David, you should be live.
Yes, I am. I had the honor of working down in Australia about 20 years ago, and I enjoyed very much the cool climate, Mornington Peninsula, and then Mount Langi, Iran.
Oh, yeah, that's from Grampians. Yeah. Mount Langi Giran is from Grampians. That's lovely stuff.
Yeah, they're still making good quality wines?
They still are. They were in the market here for a little while, and I'm not sure what's happened. Because they own a couple of different wineries. A group that owns a couple of them. A Yarra property called Yearing Station, and they also own a Margaret River property. But I don't know what's happened with them. So you've made me think I need to go back and find out what's going on. But lovely stuff and super age worthy. It's one of the classics from Australia. That is a wine that has a lot of rotunda and a lot of that pepper element.
Yes, that's what I enjoy about it.
Ah, cool. Awesome.
All right, up next I have Terry Newman Hyde. Terry, you should be able to talk.
I'm sorry, what messaging you? What do you say? I know who the friend is?
You're live. Well, somebody thinks they're funny. Come on.
Hi. We just had a question. We didn't get some of the wines on the list. So in my cellar, I had a 2008 Clarendon Hills Piggott Range. I just wondered if you could talk to that one a little bit because we're enjoying it a lot. I tried to find some Shiraz from each of the areas you were highlighting.
Yeah, well, lucky you, Clarendon Hills. I don't know that specific wine, but I can tell you a bit about where Clarendon Hills is, and like they're in a really supreme spot in the McLaren Vale. That was a hot vintage. 08 was a very hot vintage in that part of South Australia. And you can tell there was the people that got the grapes in before the boiling of them happened. There was I think there was something like 4 days in a row or 5 days in a row of 45 degrees Celsius, which is well into the hundreds. So it was really what they would say in Australia, pretty bloody hot. But you can taste that some people have picked a bit earlier and managed to avoid that because it was right towards the end of the harvest. So clearly, if the wine's showing beautifully now, the Clarendon Hills probably picked a bit earlier. I don't specifically know that wine, but warm vintage, and you're probably getting some ridiculously gorgeous flavors out of that wine right now, I would imagine, because it's now 10, 12 years of age, and you're getting some of that secondary and tertiary sort of,